At 3 a.m., my stepbrother stabbed me. I laughed on my hidden camera. Now $9.4 million mansion pays my bills. That's the short, punchy, viral summary, but the reality was so much uglier, so much colder, and infinitely more satisfying. The moment Michael lunged at me with that ridiculous, oversized kitchen knife, a prop really more than a weapon, my first emotion wasn't terror or shock. It was a deep, guttural, triumphant laugh that started in my chest and broke the pre-dawn silence of the suburban Chicago house. I laughed because the security camera, disguised as a charging station on the nightstand, was recording everything in crystal-clear 4K. I laughed because I had let them believe they had won the battle over the family fortune and my intellectual property, but they had just signed the warrant for their own financial execution. And most of all, I laughed because the $9.4 million Napa Valley estate I was about to acquire? It was being paid for entirely by the crushing legal settlement they were about to fund. The actual, public, devastating betrayal had happened just hours earlier at the annual Thanksgiving gathering, which my mother, Laura, insisted on hosting in the formal dining room of the house I, through years of my own financial prudence and support, had kept afloat. Everyone was there. Laura, my stepfather James, Michael, and a smattering of oblivious, wealthy family friends who had driven in from the suburbs of Naperville and Hinsdale, all expecting the usual feast of turkey, apple pie, and passive aggression. The tension had been simmering since Michael, my entitled, perpetually failing stepbrother, had launched his revolutionary fintech startup, Nexus Analytics, 3 months prior. Revolutionary, of course, because it was based entirely on the proprietary trading algorithm I had spent 3 years of late nights and early mornings developing. The moment came right after James, red-faced and sentimental, cleared his throat to make a toast. I took a calm sip of my sparkling cider, knowing what was coming. I was dressed in a sleek, custom-tailored black suit, a quiet power statement, while Michael wore a cheap, ill-fitting Armani knockoff that screamed desperation. "To Michael!" James announced, his voice cracking with false pride. "Our son has not only achieved the American dream, but he has exceeded it. Nexus Analytics is on the verge of its Series A funding, a multi-million-dollar deal that will secure this family's future for generations. And to show our faith in his vision and brilliance," James paused dramatically, glancing pointedly at me, "Laura and I have decided to give him the controlling interest in the family trust. Effective immediately." The room erupted in applause. The family friends, like David and Carol from down the street, offered their congratulations. I watched Laura beam, a vision of smug self-satisfaction in her expensive silk dress. Her eyes, meeting mine across the table, held a cold, unwavering cruelty that I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. It was the look of a predator who believed its prey was cornered. "And Alara, honey," Laura added, throwing shade with the casual flick of a wrist. "You know how much we appreciate you taking care of the house while Michael was busy creating. But now that he's the main breadwinner, perhaps you can focus on, well, maybe finding a nice, steady government job? Something less volatile than your little freelance data entry." The insult was calculated to sting. My freelance data entry was actually a high-level remote consulting position with a premier New York hedge fund, work I did to cover all their bills while they bankrolled Michael's education and business ventures. I felt the familiar burn of betrayal, but I kept my face utterly neutral. I was playing chess while they were playing checkers, and they had just made their final, fatal move. "That's incredibly generous of you, Mom and James," I replied, my voice calm, the kind of steady tone that unnerves panic. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry, I simply smiled, a tight, professional, and entirely unreadable smile. "I suppose that means Michael finally paid me back for the $200,000 I lent him to pay off his gambling debts 2 years ago, right? Before he launched his big revolutionary idea?" The room went silent. The family friends shifted uncomfortably. Michael's face turned the color of the cranberry sauce. Laura's smile evaporated, replaced by a desperate, panicked squint. Laura, this is Thanksgiving, not a time for throwing shade, Laura hissed, her voice low and furious. No, it's a time for disclosure, Mom. Especially since the IRS likes full disclosure when trusts are being restructured. I corrected her, still smiling. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket, which, by the way, was made by my friend Ethan's family tailor in Manhattan. I pulled out a sleek, minimalist silver USB drive. I didn't hand it to anyone. I simply placed it next to my plate of half-eaten pumpkin pie. This little drive holds the original, immutable time-stamped source code for my algorithm, Nexus Prime, registered under my name with the U.S. Copyright Office, and authenticated with a private blockchain ledger. The code that Michael borrowed and rebranded as Nexus Analytics, I said, emphasizing the word borrowed. I guess that's why the $9.4 million mansion in Napa is going to be such a perfect place for my new headquarters. It's got a great, quiet study for my legal team. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I'll let you get back to celebrating the family's impending, spectacular bankruptcy. I stood up, pushing my chair in neatly. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked out, leaving the sound of sputtering rage and rising panic echoing behind me. I drove straight to the little guest house behind the main home, the only part they hadn't claimed, knowing Michael was impulsive and James and Laura were cornered. I set up the camera. I slept with one eye open. And at 3 a.m., just as I predicted, Michael tried to finish the job they had started years ago. The flash of the cheap steel, the wild, desperate look in his eyes, and my calm, controlled laugh that sealed his fate. That was the real start of my story. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. The attempted stabbing, however clumsy, was the final, undeniable proof of their moral decay and the lengths they would go to protect their lie. I packed a single carry-on bag, grabbed the silver USB, and called the one person who could turn the mess of my life into a masterclass in revenge, Ethan Cole. You sound disturbingly cheerful for a woman who just avoided a felony assault charge. Ethan's voice crackled through the speaker of my SUV as I merged onto I-90 East, heading for Chicago O'Hare. Ethan and I had met in college at Northwestern, bonded over a shared cynicism for the ultra-wealthy elite we grew up around, and later became business partners. He was now a high-powered corporate litigation attorney and investor in New York, with the kind of family wealth that meant his word carried weight in every boardroom from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. Oh, it's not an assault charge, Ethan, it's attempted murder, I corrected him, the calm professionalism back in my voice. I have it on tape, 4K audio, the whole 9 yards. I think this moves the needle from a simple IP theft case to an existential threat to the Vance family name and assets. There was a long pause on his end. Ilara, you are unbelievable. I thought you were talking metaphorically about the stabbed me part. Never underestimate Michael's ability to be a literal idiot, I sighed. I'm taking the next flight to JFK. Meet me at your office. We're filing an emergency motion for a restraining order and a cease and desist, followed by a lawsuit that redefines the term scorched earth. The flight was long, but it gave me time to indulge in the necessary, painful flashback that had led me to this moment. People saw me now as Ilara Vance, the cool, collected fintech consultant, but my whole life had been defined by a quiet, agonizing sacrifice. I was only 15 when my biological father passed away, leaving behind a small trust that was supposed to be my college fund. 2 years later, my mother, Laura, married James Vance, a man with a comfortable but precarious mid-level executive salary, and a truly awful son, Michael. James immediately invested heavily in a series of disastrous oil and gas startups that collapsed faster than a house of cards. The family was suddenly staring down the barrel of serious debt. That was the moment I, the intelligent but perpetually overlooked daughter, stepped up. I didn't go to the expensive, prestigious East Coast university I'd been accepted to. I deferred, sold the assets in my small trust, and used the money to clear James's most immediate debts and pay the property taxes on the Chicago house. I enrolled in a local state university, majoring in applied mathematics and computer science, while simultaneously working 3 part-time jobs, one of them as a glorified data entry temp for a trading firm that ironically gave me the foundational knowledge for my future algorithm. "Your little brother needs to focus on his studies, Alara," Laura would say, always using the collective "your little brother," even though Michael was older by 2 years. "He's going to be the one to carry the family name. Your path is less ambitious. Stability is good for girls." The condescension was a constant, low-frequency hum throughout my 20s. While I was sacrificing my career trajectory, working remotely from a tiny, shared apartment in Texas while building my expertise in predictive modeling and quantitative analysis, Michael was coasting. He'd drop out of one community college after another, blaming the professors, the curriculum, or his unrealized artistic potential. James and Laura treated him like a fragile genius, always pouring money into his latest doomed scheme, from a custom sneaker resale business to a revolutionary app for dog walkers. My ultimate betrayal occurred when I finally hit gold. Working late nights in a cramped apartment in Austin, Texas, sustained by cold brew and BBQ ribs, I cracked it. A self-learning AI model, Nexus Prime, that could accurately predict short-term stock volatility with an unprecedented 78% success rate. I was giddy. I flew back to Chicago for a long weekend, planning to tell my parents I was finally going to launch my own legitimate business, Elara Analytics, and would no longer be subsidizing their lifestyle. I made the mistake of showing Michael. It was a lazy Saturday afternoon. Michael was sprawled on the couch, watching a Super Bowl pregame show. I needed to use the big monitor in James's den to run a final simulation, and Michael came in, curious. I, foolishly, out of a desperate lifelong need for my family's approval, walked him through the core mechanics. "It's genius, Alara," he admitted, for the only time in his life. "But you're such a geek. No one will invest in Alara Analytics. The name is boring. You need a brand, an edge. Let me help you pitch it." I was cautious, but I allowed him access to a secure, partitioned drive on my main laptop, which I left in the Chicago house when I flew back to Texas. I gave him the presentation deck, not the core code, thinking the concept was safe. I was wrong. I was so wrong. The discovery of the lie was less a dramatic revelation and more a slow, sickening realization confirmed by data. About 6 months before the stabbing, I was having a quiet, sad girl hour at a Starbucks in downtown Austin, analyzing market data, when I saw a press release flash across a fintech blog. Michael Vance secures angel funding for Nexus Analytics, disruptive AI trading platform. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nexus Analytics. He had stolen the name I had mentioned to him in passing, but a stolen name was nothing. The algorithm was everything. I immediately ran a deep forensic check on the protected drive I had left behind. Michael, in his idiotic arrogance, hadn't stolen the final copyrighted code. He had stolen the intermediate build, the one I had shown him, which was about 80% complete but still contained the core IP architecture. The bigger crime was how he used my own credentials to access a restricted financial data API I had paid for. And then, using James's weak password, he had logged into my mother's email and intercepted crucial communication from a legal firm about my IP registration. They had known. They had actively conspired. My data analysis skills, honed over years of parsing complex financial documents, allowed me to trace the money. The angel funding wasn't external. It was the entire remaining balance of James and Laura's retirement savings, funneled through an LLC to make it look like seed capital. Michael was pitching my idea, using my stolen work, funded by their last reserves, and selling the lie as the Vance family legacy. That moment changed everything. The pain of the betrayal, not just of my work, but of my years of financial support and emotional sacrifice, coalesced into a focused, icy rage. I deleted my immediate contact information, stopped subsidizing their monthly expenses. They didn't even notice for 2 months. That's how self-absorbed they were. And moved my entire operation to a high-security server farm. I flew back to New York City and met Ethan Cole for an impromptu happy hour at a sleek, open-plan rooftop bar overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city's aggressive, win-at-all-costs energy was exactly the medicine I needed. "They didn't just steal your IP, Alara. They stole your future," Ethan stated, swirling the ice in his old-fashioned. "And you, being the good soldier, gave them every chance to come clean. This isn't just a lawsuit. This is a public service announcement about what happens when you mess with the wrong daughter." Ethan, who understood the intricacies of Wall Street and complex litigation better than anyone I knew, became my silent partner and legal consigliere. We began to build the plan, a strategy so multi-layered and financially ruinous it would make the IRS blush. Phase 1. The Trap. We let Michael launch Nexus Analytics. We watched him raise capital, hire employees, and make public statements, all while unknowingly cementing the timeline of IP infringement. Ethan ensured I had a new, bulletproof, and proprietary authentication method for Nexus Prime 2.0 that would withstand any legal challenge. Crucially, we didn't file the suit yet. Phase 2. The Documentation. I used my background in data security to create an impenetrable digital trail. Every email, every bank transfer they'd missed, every recorded conversation where they spoke with contempt about my work. I digitized and time-stamped it. The 3 a.m. hidden camera, which I had installed that morning before Thanksgiving, was the final, non-financial piece of the puzzle, proving criminal intent and the depth of their desperation. Phase 3. The third-party leverage. Ethan wasn't just my lawyer, he was my ace up my sleeve. His family owned one of the largest private equity firms in the U.S., specializing in acquiring distressed tech assets. Ethan made a few quiet calls. He didn't threaten, he just provided information. He informed the VC firms Michael was courting that Nexus Analytics was operating with questionable IP rights and had significant, unaddressed liabilities. The Series A funding, which James had gloated about at Thanksgiving, was already DOA before the turkey was carved. The VCs simply pulled out without telling Michael, leaving him and his parents financially overextended. When I arrived at Ethan's New York office, a glass tower in Midtown, the day after the attempted stabbing, he had a team waiting. His best corporate litigator, Linda Chen, a formidable woman who lived for crushing white-collar criminals, was already reviewing the camera footage. "Michael is not smart enough to know what a felony is," Linda said, her voice dry as parchment. "He just knew you were about to spill the beans, and he panicked." "This footage is the nail in the coffin, Alara. We're not just suing for the IP, we're suing for emotional distress, attempted grievous bodily harm, and a percentage of all future revenue generated by the Nexus architecture." My first confrontation came 3 days later, in a sterile, overpriced mediation room in Chicago. It wasn't the final showdown, just a preliminary hearing for the temporary restraining order, TRO, we had filed. I sat across the table from James, Laura, and a clearly terrified Michael, who was flanked by a nervous, overworked defense attorney. "I was ice. They were fire." "Alara, how dare you?" Laura shrieked, ignoring the mediator. "This is our family. We gave you everything. After all your father and I did." "You gave me a life of obligation and emotional neglect, Mom," I interrupted, my voice perfectly level. "I gave you 5 years of financial stability, and you repaid me by facilitating the theft of my life's work and encouraging your son to try and stab me in my sleep." Michael started to stammer. "It was an accident. I was going to cut an apple. I was sleepwalking. The camera is illegal." "It's perfectly legal in a private residence, Michael, especially when you can prove you had a reasonable expectation of criminal activity," Ethan cut in, leaning back in his leather chair, a portrait of relaxed, expensive indifference. "And a knife is a poor choice of accessory for an apple at 3 a.m., especially one aimed at the abdomen. My client is seeking $15 million in damages, immediate cessation of all Nexus Analytics operations, and full ownership of all underlying code, marketing, and client lists." James, who had remained silent, finally spoke. his voice weak. Ilara, please. Your mother and I. We just wanted Michael to succeed. He was struggling. You always land on your feet. You're strong. I'm strong because you forced me to be, I said, looking him straight in the eye. But my strength is no longer a tool for your negligence. It's now a weapon pointed directly at your assets. You messed with the wrong daughter, James. The TRP is granted. Nexus Analytics is frozen. Your credit lines are called. Game over. The shock on their faces was palpable. They thought they could dismiss me, minimize me, and silence me. They never factored in the meticulous, data-driven rage of a woman who was tired of being the family's silent ATM. Over the next few months, the development of the case became my sole obsession. I worked closely with Linda and Ethan, treating the lawsuit like a complex corporate acquisition. We used my forensic audit to expose James and Laura's intricate scheme to defraud the IRS by misrepresenting the nature of the angel investment to avoid capital gains taxes and secure fraudulent business loans. The IP infringement was complicated, but the financial fraud was a clean, undeniable felony. During this period, my primary support came from Ethan. We spent hours in his office, ordering in food, sometimes high-end sushi, sometimes just cheap burgers and fries, American style, while building the case file. Ethan didn't coddle me. He challenged me, turning my emotional pain into legal leverage. He saw my resilience, not my vulnerability. Your advantage isn't the code, Ilara, he told me one evening, as we looked out at the lights of downtown. It's your discipline. They're undisciplined, chaotic, and predictable. They're running on emotion. We're running on fact. And fact always wins in a courtroom. I also reconnected with my aunt, Sarah, my father's sister, whom Laura had systematically pushed out of my life. Sarah, an interior designer in San Francisco, had always been a quiet supporter. When I told her the full story, including the stabbing, she was horrified. Your mother always had a sickness for status, Ilara, Sarah said over a long-distance call. She saw Michael as the shortcut to the lifestyle James promised. You were just the reliable utility. I'm proud of you for standing up. You deserve the entire world. Sarah's emotional validation was just as important as Ethan's legal counsel. It reaffirmed that I wasn't fighting an entire family. I was isolating a dysfunctional unit. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was brutal. Michael's defense team tried to paint me as a disgruntled, obsessive sister trying to sabotage a legitimate startup. But every document they produced was immediately countered by one of mine: time-stamped code, email metadata that proved Laura coached Michael on how to lie about the concept's origin, and a devastatingly clear audio recording of James telling Michael, "We just need to stall Ilara until the Series A closes. Then she can't touch us." The moment of truth, the climax, came 6 months later. Not in a grand New York courtroom, but in the Federal District Court of Northern Illinois, the venue for the IP infringement case. The civil lawsuit was the one I wanted to win publicly. The criminal implications, for Michael's attempted murder and their financial fraud, were being handled separately, but the civil trial would expose their greed to the world. The courtroom was packed. Michael and his parents sat on the defense side, looking pale, tired, and deeply unhappy. Their lawyer, a slick, aggressive man named Mr. Harrington, was trying to argue that Nexus Analytics was an independent product, created from general market knowledge, and that my footage of Michael was a staged theatrical stunt. The moment Linda Chen stood up for the rebuttal, I felt a tremor of pure, concentrated vengeance. Linda was a master of the reveal. She had saved the 3 a.m. video footage for this exact moment. Your Honor, opposing counsel suggests this is a mere dispute over source code, Linda began, her voice ringing clear. He suggests my client, Miss Vance, fabricated evidence to destroy her stepbrother's life. Let's look at the evidence of the family dynamic, shall we? A dynamic where the defendants, James and Laura Vance, systematically devalued and defrauded their own daughter while empowering and funding a man who, in a moment of panic, tried to end her life. She then presented a meticulously edited 3-minute clip. It started with James's self-congratulatory Thanksgiving toast, then cut to my calm exit, and finally, the eerie, silent 3 a.m. footage. The camera angle was slightly high, capturing Michael entering the room. Hesitation, the desperate plunge with the knife, and my quiet, maniacal laugh just before he stumbled and dropped the weapon, fleeing the scene. The reaction in the courtroom was instantaneous and profound. Laura gasped, clutching James's arm. Michael buried his face in his hands. The judge, an older, stern woman, leaned forward, her expression turning from professional detachment to grim, focused attention. "Counselor, I believe the defense's claim of this being a staged stunt has been severely undermined," the judge stated, her voice tight with disapproval. "Let's move to the matter of the IP infringement. Ms. Chen, do you have any evidence that would conclusively link the code-based Nexus analytics to the original Nexus Prime beyond circumstantial metadata?" This was my cue. I stood up, taking the stand as an expert witness. I didn't need a lawyer to speak for my code. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, calm and collected, pulling up a side-by-side comparison on the courtroom screens. When building complex self-learning algorithms, every programmer develops unique, almost subconscious stylistic identifiers, like a written signature. Michael's ignorance of advanced quantitative modeling meant he copied the code verbatim. I have highlighted a specific non-functional segment of code in the Nexus Analytics build. A 3-line conditional loop that I deliberately included as a digital watermark in the early prototype. It's an aesthetically pleasing but mathematically redundant loop that serves no function other than to identify the code's true author. It is a signature, and that signature is mine. The silence that followed was more damning than any scream. Michael's attorney Harrington tried a weak cross-examination, but I dismantled his technical arguments with surgical precision, speaking the language of data and proprietary algorithms fluently. I proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that Michael was not the coder. He was the thief. The consequence was immediate and total. The judge, citing the blatant IP theft, the compelling evidence of criminal intent, the stabbing, and the clear pattern of financial fraud, ruled in my favor on the civil suit. Nexus Analytics was permanently shuttered. Its assets, client list, and all future revenue streams were awarded to me. Furthermore, the court imposed a punitive damages fine that, combined with the settlement for emotional distress, totaled a staggering $25 million. James and Laura were utterly ruined. The house was liquidated to cover preliminary legal fees. Their retirement accounts, already depleted to fund Michael's failed venture, were now frozen pending the criminal investigation into their tax and loan fraud. Michael faced charges for attempted murder and multiple counts of wire fraud. The last I heard, James was looking for low-level employment, and Laura was forced to move into a cheap, rented condo, having lost the status and privilege she had chased her entire life. They didn't just lose their money, they lost their names, their reputation, and their standing in the Chicago community. Meanwhile, my life entered a phase of glorious rebuilding. The $25 million settlement negotiated swiftly by Ethan's firm allowed me to finally execute the true American dream, one built on actual merit, not inherited entitlement. The first purchase was symbolic. The $9.4 million vineyard estate in Napa Valley, California. It wasn't just a house, it was a compound. It had a main residence with a state-of-the-art office complex, a guest house perfect for visiting partners, and sprawling grounds that forced a sense of peace and perspective. The mansion wasn't just paying my bills, it was a physical monument to my resilience, funded entirely by the wreckage of the family who tried to destroy me. I officially launched Vance Cole Strategies, a new fintech firm in partnership with Ethan. We focused on ethical AI and data-driven investing, a sharp, clean contrast to the mess Michael had made. Ethan handled the legal and investment strategy. I ran the quantitative analysis. We were an unstoppable force, professional in the boardroom and fiercely protective of our boundaries. The partnership evolved from professional to personal, the shared crucible of the lawsuit having forged an unbreakable bond. One sunny afternoon, I stood on the terrace of my new Napa mansion, sipping a glass of local Sauvignon Blanc. The air was warm, smelling of sun-baked earth and distant oak. Sarah, my aunt, had come to visit and was helping me plan the decor. "You know, Elora," Sarah said, placing a hand on my shoulder, looking out at the endless rows of grapevines. "I always knew you were destined for something big. They always called you the silent one, the quiet one. They confused silence with weakness." "They confuse the person who pays the bills with the person who has no power," I replied, the bitterness finally gone, replaced by a cool, smooth sense of satisfaction. The moment Michael came at me with that knife, I realized their cruelty had reached its zenith. And for the first time, I wasn't hurt. I was validated. I was right to protect myself, and I was right to prepare the deepest possible cut in return. The ultimate victory wasn't the money or the mansion, though they were excellent perks. The victory was the complete reclamation of my narrative. I had spent 20 years being the reliable, unseen daughter who cleaned up messes. Now, I was the architect of my own empire. My $9.4 million mansion in Napa Valley, surrounded by rolling hills and the promise of a brilliant future, was the quiet, luxurious proof that if you come for me, you better bring more than a dull kitchen knife. Because I will always get the last laugh, and I will always have the receipts. I was Alara Vance, and my game was finally, truly, over.